Thank you, Madam Speaker. It's good to be able to be here this afternoon. It's unfortunate we don't have a little stronger bill with a little better content in it, but we'll deal with what we've got here today. And as usual, this is the kind of thing that we've had to face with this government. It seems it should be no surprise to us that they're in kind of the chaos that they're in, because when we see a fairly consistent presentation that leads to bills that are this weak. And I'm going to talk a little bit about those weaknesses later. It's actually interesting where this bill comes from, Madam Speaker, which is basically a knee-jerk reaction to Supreme Court decisions that were made. The Liberals decided to play both sides of that game, so they're appealing those decisions at the same time that they're bringing forward a whole new set of legislation. I think the public needs to understand that. And unfortunately, on this bill, they have missed the boat both on content and also on the knowledge that is shown in this bill. And we heard that from the witnesses who came forward at committee, where witness after witness said, first of all, we weren't consulted, and second of all, this bill is not going in the right direction, and it needs a real rework or to be thrown out, set aside, or whatever. And certainly, one of the things that the Liberals have done consistency since they've come to power is they brought things forward, and then they've actually had to take a look at them and decide whether they're worth bringing forward, and then they start to get people's opinion and find out that they're on the wrong track. Then they start to backtrack, and then they begin to amend their legislation, and then once they come back in here, then they start forcing it through. And so we're here today on a day with time allocation on a bill. They've not only brought in time allocation for report stage, they've already brought it in for third reading as well. And so we've seen this many times before. We're seeing it here today. Fortunately, some of these occasions, Madam Speaker, they've actually set bills aside and decided they weren't going to see them through, and I guess electoral reform would be one of those that was obvious. C-69, Madam Speaker, is another one that people across this country are begging the Liberals to set aside because it's going to basically destroy the energy industry in Canada if they bring it through. Sometimes they can listen, but usually they find it very difficult to do that. It's actually ironic, I guess, today that we have time allocation today because, Madam Speaker, had we had petitions today, I wanted to bring one forward, and this is an electronic petition. It was actually E-1886, and I found it fascinating. Over 10,000 people signed up on this petition. So an electronic petition from across Canada, people, and it had to do with this issue. And this morning, I'll come back to this in a minute, but this morning I talked and asked a question of the Public Safety Minister. I said to him, you know, you've been here a long time, and he was here before I was here. One of the things that he was part of before I came here was an attack and actually the jailing of Western Canadian farmers. And these were farmers who had said, we'd like to sell our own grain. I know one of them had donated 1 bushel of grain to a 4-H club in Montana. And the present public safety minister was one of those ministers who led the charge against those farmers. And by the time they were done, they had 5 different agencies, 5 different departments of this government working against individual Canadians. The CRA was involved, Justice was involved, Immigration was involved, the RCMP were firmly involved, and you can read the stories of what happened, a couple of books by a man named Don Barron. I was writing about raids in the middle of the night on people's farms, trying to confiscate their equipment and those kinds of things. And then the agriculture minister, who is now the public safety minister. I said, why is it that we seem that every time we turn around that you're going after regular law-abiding Canadians? And Madam Speaker, we see this again with the initiative coming from the other side on the handguns. Handguns have been very restricted since 1930s. People in Canada use them for sporting, and there are many people across Canada who are licensed, have gone through the process to get licensed, and this government seems bound and determined to try to make some sort of criminals out of handgun owners across this country. And so again, my question to him was, why is it that you continually come after law-abiding citizens? Especially when on the other side, you're not all that interested, it seems, in actually protecting people from criminals. And that brings me back actually to my petition, Madam Speaker, which says in here, and everyone's familiar with this case of Terry Lynn McClintock, who was convicted of first-degree murder in the horrific abduction, rape, and murder of 8-year-old Tori Stafford. She was moved from a secure facility to a healing lodge without fences, where the government confirmed the presence of children. She was not eligible for parole until 2031. and the Ochi Healing Lodge, which happens to be in my riding, lacks the necessary security measures to ensure the safety of local citizens in Maple Creek, Saskatchewan and surrounding areas. And so over 10,000 people across Canada called on the Government of Canada exercise its moral and political authority to ensure this decision is reversed and cannot be allowed to happen again in other situations. Now, Madam Speaker, we all know that it took this government weeks before they would acknowledge that there was a problem around this transfer, and in the end, they actually did semi-reverse that transfer. But the interesting thing in this bill, in Bill C-63, we see some of those same things happening in here. I noticed right at the beginning in Section 2.1, it talks about the Act has to be replaced by the following. The service must use the least restrictive measures consistent with the protection of society, staff members, and offenders. So there's no sense here that there's some sort of disciplinary activity that's taking place in our prison. This government comes and says, look, we've got to find the least restrictive, the most friendly way that we can treat people who are being held in our prisons right now. We can go through many of the provisions of this bill. It's interesting that they talk about in here about prisoners receiving the most effective programs. But when the minister was asked, is there costing on this? No, there's no costing. We haven't done a costing on this bill. And so you can talk all day long about effective programs, about health care, which this bill does, but if you haven't costed it before you bring it forward, how would you even know what it is that you're going to be expected to provide? It talks about in here a number of other things as well about the criteria for the selection of the penitentiary for the prison. Again, it says it must be the least restrictive environment for the person that they can possibly find. And so Corrections Service Canada has to deliberately run around and try to find the least restrictive place that they can put people. And many of these people are very dangerous individuals. I heard a little discussion earlier about whether some of these people are actually bad people, and I heard some heckling from the other side, basically implying that no, they're not. Everybody here can be reformed if we treat them well, and we just ask them for their opinion, that they'll give us a good, solid opinion, and we'll all get along, and we can hold hands and sing the songs that we need to sing. But the reality is, we've got some people in these prisons who are very bad people and who do not deserve to be running around, basically, at their own choice. Again, one of the strange changes that they're making in this bill is that they're allowing the commissioner to designate either a penitentiary or any section of a penitentiary at any level of security that he or she chooses. And I think that's a very strange thing to have. Are you saying that we can have in a minimum security prison, such as Ochi Healing Lodge, a prison that's in the edge of Cypress Hills area. It's a beautiful location right on the edge of the trees. There are no fences around it. There are a series of cottages that the women right now spend time in the cottages. They have programming in the main lodge, and that's the programming that they do there. But are you saying that the commissioner can then designate that one of those cottages is a maximum security unit without changing the level of facilities, without changing anything else, just saying this is now a maximum level unit, and so we'll be able to put somebody in there who's supposed to be in a maximum security prison? I think that all of us would put our head in our hands and say this seems to be a crazy idea, because within these prisons there are people who, first of all, some of them do not want to be in the general population. They're okay with being segregated. They don't want to be out there, and there's a number of reasons why that might happen. One of them is they may get hurt and injured themselves. Secondly, they may hurt or injure someone else. And so there are situations where people don't want to be put back into the general population of the prison, and this bill basically says the department has to continually work, do everything they can to put them back into that population. I can't believe, Madam Speaker, that I'm already just about used up all of my time here, but one of the common themes through this entire bill, and actually through the legislation that the Liberals keep bringing forward on crime, is that obviously it seems like they just want to try to make life easier for the most difficult prisoners. And they should be taking a look at the public, at public safety. They should be taking a look at those people who have to work in the prisons. Why don't they ever seem to focus on them instead of just trying to find a way to, if you want to call it, hug a thug. They seem to really enjoy to do that. So this bill has a lot of rhetoric. It has very few specifics. We're told that it wasn't costed. And so once again, it's a demonstration of how soft the Liberals are on crime, how willing they are to close their eyes to reality. And there are just a series of promises here that are, again, going to be they're not going to be kept. And Madam Speaker, this bill should actually be set aside. It's unfortunate that the government has moved for, I don't know what, the 60th or 70th time on time allocation to force this bill through.
Then comments. The honourable member for Oakville North, Burlington.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I've heard members of the opposition say this is a branding exercise, that there's not dramatic changes, that it's just a lot of rhetoric. And I have to say, having studied this bill, I couldn't be more proud of it. I actually believe firmly in my heart that years from now, not only federal institutions, provincial institutions, and around the world will be looking at Canada for the way that we have ended segregation. When the minister appeared at committee, he was asked if it had been costed. That was prior to the fall economic statement, when $448 million has been allocated to implement these the revised SIUs. And I'm wondering if any of the members have actually read the bill to see that there is oversight in it. It's actually my amendment. So my question to the member is, if this is such a terrible plan to end administrative segregation in prisons, what would you propose that we do?
Again, I would remind the member to address the questions to the chair. The honourable member for Cypress Hills, Grasslands.
Of course, Madam Speaker, we understand that you would certainly have the capacity to answer that question if you chose to. But I think that, you know, once again, they're hiding under, as my colleague a little bit earlier pointed out, changing the name of something and then making it pretty much exactly the same thing. So they're going to change what used to be solitary confinement to structured, what's it called, structured intervention units. And if there's one thing that this government is good at, it's finding these acronyms and these kinds of things that they can disguise what's actually going on. The reality is it's not going to change things a lot. And the other reality is they're actually appealing the decisions that were made at the court anyway. They want them, they would sooner go, or apparently if they win, they'll go back to the other system anyhow.
Comments? The honourable member for Saskatoon West.
And I want to thank my honourable colleague for his speech. I believe, Madam Speaker, him and I would not see eye to eye on many things on the issue around public safety and corrections. One thing he did mention in his speech where we will agree, and that is that the changes that the government is proposing to, and I'm going to use the word solitary confinement, are really cosmetic and did not get the support of witnesses that came to the committee. I do want to also remind the honourable member, through you, Madam Speaker, that many of the issues that we're facing around safety in corrections for both staff and inmates has come from years of underfunding and over-incarcerating people, particularly Indigenous people from our province of Saskatchewan. So I have two questions for my honourable colleague. Does he support the Supreme Court ruling that has said that solitary confinement, or the euphemistic term administrative segregation, is unconstitutional? And I would like to know whether he agrees with that. And then secondly, does he agree to the evidence that shows for those people who have mental health issues, and that group of people in prisons is extremely high, that actually using solitary confinement, administrative segregation, actually exacerbates people's mental health symptoms and actually causes people more harm than good? Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The honourable member for Cypress Hills, Grasslands.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And obviously there's a whole host of issues involved in that question. I appreciate my colleague's question there. But the issue of mental health, the bill talks about programming. It talks about setting up programs for every single prisoner that's in prison. Now, I think we're going to agree that probably there's a lot of rhetoric in here that the Liberals never have any intention of fulfilling. And so they lay these things out, they make it look like there's going to be some great change or whatever, and they're not actually going to see this through. And again, I just think that this is virtue signaling. They're replacing basically the names of things, and they're going to basically end up with the same structures, the same prisons that we've had before. And I think those same issues that my colleague talks about will probably be left unanswered and undealt with as well.